Apparently, Charles Altamont Doyle seems to have got jealous of the relations between Brian Charles Waller and Conan Doyle's overworked, exhausted, multi-child producing mother, Mary. And she does seem to have been quite attached to Brian Charles Waller, and he gave her a cottage on his estate where she lived for many years. Now, Waller's interest may actually have been in Conan Doyle's elder sister, who went off to be a governess in Portugal. Annette, she did not, in fact, marry him, and she may not have particularly liked him. It may have been that there was a relationship between Waller and the mother. But the story of the cardboard box, which turns on a drunken sailor who ultimately murders his wife and her lover, appeared in the Strand magazine but was suppressed when Conan Doyle was bringing out the memoirs. Charles Altamont Doyle had died within the few months separating the appearance of the story and the appearance of the book form. I think that that's very much related, that was one thing based on what had happened. You see, Conan Doyle is writing these stories at full tilt. He's not saying, I'm going to put Daddy in this looking ridiculous. He pushes the first thing that comes into his mind. But so often it's the tragedy of Daddy.
What has confused many people about Doyle is the extraordinary gap between the public and private faces of this very complicated man.
My dear Watson, life is infinitely stranger than anything which the mind of man could invent. We would not dare to conceive of the things that are mere commonplaces of existence. Depend upon it, there is nothing so unnatural as that which seems most ordinary.
And there is nothing so deceptive as the obvious. Doyle did leave us one almost suspiciously obvious clue as to the real original of Sherlock Holmes.
It's always difficult to trace the origins of a fictional character, but if the idea for Sherlock Holmes started anywhere, it was probably here, at the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh. After leaving Stonyhurst, Doyle read medicine at Edinburgh University, where, for a short while, he was the outpatient's clerk to the then Professor of Surgery, Dr. Joseph Bell.
When he was the clerk to Joseph Bell, the surgeon, Bell, holding his clinic, is trying to intimidate the patients, not so much put them at their ease as put them at their disease. And a patient, for instance, comes in, and Bell looks at him and says, "Did you have a pleasant walk across Bransfield Links today?" And the patient looks at the arrangement, and after the patient has gone, you see, thinking obviously the doctor is a superb witch doctor or something, then Bell turns to Conan Doyle in the class, "Did you not see, Doyle, that there was gravel, reddish gravel, attached to the instep? That is to be found in Bransfield Links and nowhere else in the neighbourhood." Now, of course, you can do that kind of thing in a very small area. You can't do it the way Sherlock Holmes did it. "Observation tells me, Watson, that you visited Wigmore Street Post Office this morning. There is a reddish gravel which has been thrown up where they have taken up the road outside Wigmore Street, which is nowhere else to be found in the neighbourhood." And supposedly Sherlock Holmes could tell what part of London any stains on Watson's coat had come from. That's simply taking the achievement of Bell in Edinburgh over a small area, unravelling it like an enormous magic carpet or something which spreads to many times its size, and the reader in London suddenly feels London is controllable. Somebody knows what's going on here, even to the minutest details. This is a terrifying place, but one where we can find a guide in whom we have confidence and belief.
There were certain qualities Bell had. He had taught his students that in medicine, observation is all important. In order to understand an illness, you have to be able to see the signs of it in a person. And you can, I can demonstrate this, Bell would say, by looking at the signs on a person's clothing, which shows their profession. And he had various things to raise the students' powers of observation. A classic one was to put some acid on the table, put his finger into it, and then put it into his mouth, and ask people to do the same. What they didn't notice was he put one finger in and then he used the other finger in his mouth, and they just hadn't observed. He said, well, you've got to start observing.
When a doctor goes wrong, he is the first of criminals. He has nerve and he has knowledge. Look at Palmer. Palmer and Pritchard were among the heads of their profession.
Dolls nowadays, so there's some degree of shifting dollars.
Okay.
Could also get into.
What was someone done to the patient?
He's had a tap, a drain.
Okay, so somebody's stuck a needle in the side there.
Yeah.
Again, there's some bruising round about then.
This is the kind of picture that Professor Joseph Bell would have used to teach his students. The man's back is arched because he's going to die from untreatable tetanus. 19th century medicine was a grisly business, and there's a lot of it in the Holmes character and the Holmes stories. When Watson first meets Holmes, the great detective is beating a corpse with a cudgel to try and work out whether a cadaver can bruise after death. That wasn't something Bell did, it was another of Doyle's teachers who used to do that. But the medical influence in these stories is very strong.
Surgical instruments. You know, Watson, the instruments that save life are hardly more pleasant to look at than those that take it.
Grisly thought, Holmes.
These are ophthalmic instruments of the kind used even 100 years ago to operate on the eye to remove cataracts. They're made by a company, Wiesen Company, and these manufacturers still make similar instruments today. Conan Doyle brought Wiesen Company into his famous story Silver Blaze. Holmes and Watson were called down from London to investigate the unexplained death of a horse race trainer. It was thought that the trainer had been murdered by a rival racing group. In fact, when Holmes investigated the case, the cause of death was found to be a horse's hoof. The trainer had, with ill intent, tried to disable the horse by cutting one of its ligaments, and to do this he used a ophthalmic knife made by Wiesen Company.
And there's some significance in the fact that it was a knife used in ophthalmology, isn't there?
Yes, of course there is, because Conan Doyle was training, or had trained, as an ophthalmologist, although, as we're all aware, when he went into practice he was conspicuously unsuccessful.
Doyle could not afford to buy into a practice, so he set up on his own as a doctor at Bush Villas in Southsea, near Portsmouth, in 1882. He was already a published writer. But when his practice failed to take off, Sherlock Holmes came to the rescue. The first story was sold to Beaton's Christmas Annual in 1887. Its name, A Study in Scarlet.
Dr. Watson, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, said Stamford, introducing us. How are you? He said cordially, gripping my hand with a strength which I should hardly have given him credit. You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive. How on earth did you know that? I asked in astonishment. Never mind, said he, chuckling to himself.
Sherlock Holmes started as Sherrinford Holmes, and Watson as Ormond Sacker. In the final version of The Study in Scarlet, Holmes is presented as a man with a passion for scientific truth and experiment. But Doyle's own training in this area didn't seem to be enough for him. Like many people of his time, he began to take an interest in spiritualism, taking seriously the evidence and experience of the other side, a substitute for the Catholic Church.